and I'm particularly pleased to be in Hamilton. I've only been in Canada this is my 4th year. I'm a transplanted Californian somewhat, and I used to live in Monterey where the big TED conferences were held, so this is a really great legacy, and I'm very pleased to be here. I'll introduce myself slightly, and when I talk about, I'll talk about the kind of stuff that I teach. I'm an architect, and I teach courses in design, history, and theory, and some of the ones that you would find conventional at many universities, 20th century architecture and things like that. But it's the other courses, when I start talking about what design is and what design means, that I think get more interesting and start to intersect some of my research interests and some of my takes on what sustainability means today in today's culture, and particularly in today's design environment. I teach a standard second-year course called Design Thinking, which is a kind of huge exhaustive expanse across all kinds of theories to actually get students to start thinking about how they approach the design process and how they approach design's relevance in the world. I'll have a little disclaimer before I begin. The first couple presentations and even this last one have been very heartfelt things, and my disclaimer is mine has a little bit of nudity, a little bit of sexual content, and a little bit of profanity. So just a slight warning. Although it was proofread by a 7-year-old. I always have my presentations turn into reading homework for my grade 2er. So my title tonight that I've chosen is Incongruous Hybrids. And that's kind of a loaded title, partly in a way because hybrids confronting a lot of the conventional ways that we're thinking about sustainability and how we're defining it. And incongruous, of course, things that don't fit, things that shouldn't normally go together. And that's sort of what I want to talk about a little bit. And I'll talk about a few problems, and hopefully I'm going to propose a few possible solutions, which probably are more in the vein of scenarios and how to look at design as a potential for solving some of the problems that sustainability is addressing. Problem, sustainability in design is not solving problems at the scale needed. Fairly obvious. We've had a lot of interesting debates and a lot of interesting solutions across the room as well. Small scale solutions, and slowly if we do all of them, we'll have some sort of massive changes. True, yes, but at the same time, we're not quite there. And I would encourage all of us, as we're approaching how we deal with sustainability and how we define sustainability, to start adding a little bit of cynicism in a bit. And I'll readily admit, sustainability in design is not solving problems with sincerity at the moment. We don't have great solutions. And one of the things that we tend to fool ourselves somewhat in envisioning a sustainable world as an alternative environment, an alternative world. And one of the core texts that I always give my students, I make them read Cradle to Cradle. It's fine, it has lots of good buzzwords about waste equals food, about thinking about eco-effectiveness, et cetera. But what I ask them after they've read the book is, what's the book really about? The book is really about sustainability, if it's going to happen in the world of Braungart and McDonough, is going to happen within its existing capitalist structure, change it from within. And they're doing projects for companies like Ford and 3M. This is not the place that, in one of their major projects, their big crescendo at the end of the book is redesigning a Ford plant. A car plant does not seem like the place where you would want to address the most powerful thing you can do as a sustainable designer. So one of the things that we have to admit, consumers rule. Capitalism and consumerism are still the innate superstructures of the green movement all over the world. And one of the things that happens is we fall into this nice warm patina of deception. By believing we're doing good deeds, we often open ourselves up to be much worse. I could list all kinds of statistics that are quite horrible. One of my favorite articles was one that came out in Time magazine not so long ago, where someone did a sort of serious sociological study of all the items in a big box store somewhere in Texas, which items were green and which ones claimed they were. And they did a scientific analysis and found out of the 1,018 things that they surveyed, only one was actually telling the truth. This is a problem. And so I would encourage all of us, as we start thinking about what sustainability means, how to define it, go to the dark place. Don't be so optimistic. Envision hell, imagine the worst. We still do many things simply because we can. The global marketplaces and production change often can simply absorb green initiatives within other pre-existing systems. One of the premises of looking at sustainable design is looking at things in a systematic way and looking at macro systems, whether the biological systems or whatever metaphors you're looking at. But one of the things that we constantly have to keep reminding ourselves that many of the systems that we set into place do exist and we have to work within them. Technology is a savior. I had a conversation earlier with one of my pod groups as we were going around talking about the pros and cons of technologies. We're living in a current myth where we think emergent technologies that can transform the way we think about ourselves and our stuff, but ultimately, many times are creating even more stuff. Some of these references are purposely interjecting. This is a performance by Vito Conchie in 1972, a gallery installation, which it was a performance piece in which the gallery was empty and the actual action that was going on was Vito Conchie doing sort of obscene things to him deep below the stage of the gallery. Dematerialization. Some of the myths and ideas when we start approaching how we define sustainability maybe don't always do what we're intending them to do. This is June Paik, one of the early pioneers in video art. And of course, video art, one of the comments of video art was breaking down the premises of the canvas and painting and sculpture in the traditional medium, that all of a sudden video was this kind of ephemeral, wonderful medium that could vanish in the middle of time. We could do all these wonderful things. And ultimately, by dematerializing objects into services, we should have been able to do a whole lot more with a whole lot less. Did that occur? It's debatable. Recycling, these are kind of standard terms, but upcycling is good, but recycling most often is not. Upcycling, you have to determine where something is going to go in the end of its life cycle. And recycling very often creates things that it was more damaging than before. I love when I start thinking about sustainable design, not looking at current smart cars and current design, but I like looking at things in the 40s and 50s and 30s previously. I think it's a really interesting exercise. More reality, today, North American households use 15% more power per house in the post-communication age. So have computers, have digitization, all of these things made our houses much more energy efficient? Actually not, we're using more power, we have more gadgets. Items like this, a portable radio from 1940, it's small, it's compact, it's portable, it's designed to last, it still keeps going and going and going. There's a different idea about portability, and of course some of this has to do with how long things were designed to last as well. The contrast to that would be things like Sprig eco-trucks, and these become these strange, monstrous hybrids. So there's the word hybrid again. I thought I wanted to use it, so now I'm getting an excuse. A monstrous hybrid, again, this is cradle-to-cradle kind of language. A monstrous hybrid, according to the book, is a definition of a technical nutrient and a natural nutrient that are joined together and merged in some kind of hybrid material that can never break down into anything ever again. It becomes this fused, strange world. If anybody knows these toys, they seem like the perfect green alternative. They're using things like wood pulp, leftover wood pulp, leftover garbage bags, things like that, made into a hybrid material that has no biotoxins, et cetera. The question is, of course, how does it biodegrade, where does it go, et cetera? It ends up being a hybrid that was neither fish nor fowl, and definitely not that much better. I'm no better, and one of the things that I do, and I think I'd like to talk about this slightly, when I go back to thinking about how design thinking and thinking like a designer might be the way to start to approach sustainability, I like hanging out with engineers more than I do architects. That's my traditional field. Because one of the things that engineers do that architects don't, architects look for solutions and they find solutions. Engineers, my friends that are engineers and those I work with, tend to look for failures. It's a scientific method. So with my own self, I have this very interesting little project where I'm starting to make, not so dissimilar from the second speaker, off-the-grid power systems, how to power them, how to put them together, solar panels, the inverters, all that kind of stuff that goes together. And one of the things that I'm finding purposely is how difficult it is to source this stuff, how expensive it is, how the supply chains are difficult. And Canada just recently is just passing laws now where all of the solar rebates, of course, are going to have to be 40 to 50% content in order to get the governmental rebates. And of course, a lot of the best solar panels are being made in China. They don't count. For my own little project, and these ends up being a bunch of commissions, I'm doing these on the side as a test. I won't go into great length because I don't want to eat up too much time, but in sourcing these panels, I found a really interesting guy hidden deep in the Scarborough somewhere who was smuggling in illegal Chinese panels. And I was able to, my goal was to source and do all this stuff for $1,000, and I've made it. And I've made it partly by crimping my own materials, by finding these illegal sources of panels, et cetera. So it's a study in failure, and you know, that's really not the normal way one would approach designing something. I want to fail and chronicle my failure and see how I come up with these things. But it's important. Uber efficiency, this is another myth. Don't worry, I'll do positive things too. It's not all bad news. Windows, installation, Energy Star ratings, they still suck if you live in a 4,000 square foot house. That's the reality. So a lot of the things that we've done, we've made so much progress that we've gone backwards. The average house, another statistic, the average house in the mid-1970s in North America was 1,500 square feet, and people had 2.3 children. We now have fewer children, but the average house is now 2,500 square feet. It's an odd figure. It's more thermally efficient, but is it more sustainable? Probably not. Corporate responsibility creates a most nefarious gloss for a large-scale badness. Green PepsiCo, I love these. This is a recent drive through Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is now rebranding coal as the new green energy, because all you have to do is put a scrubber on top of the coal plant, and all of a sudden it's this great natural thing. Is it a local material? Yes, it is. Is it good for the economy? Of course it is. So Pennsylvania's back. The idea of pitching coal as the next green efficient energy is insane. And we have great hybrids. It's not hard. Again, with a camera and a few hours in a big box store, we could have a great time. In my current class that I do, my design and sustainability class, each class will take apart one particular profession, and I'll have to constrain myself and bring in under 150 examples. And if we do industrial design, we look for bad things, we look for good things. I've always been a big fan of looking for bad things. I was an architecture professor in the Midwest as well, and we used to do our annual trip to Chicago. And if anybody's been to Chicago, Chicago's the most phenomenal, architecturally rich city in North America. I'll go that far and say it. Lots of Louis Sullivan, lots of Frank Lloyd Wright. So the first 2 days, we go see the great buildings, and then usually they had a day where they could rest and play, and I would take the other students, and I'd say, on your rest day, I've got another tour for you. We're gonna do the really bad architecture tour. We're gonna see the buildings that I hate and you hate, and we're gonna discuss why we hate them. It was usually the best tour. They ended up coming up with some sort of critical apparatus rather than just saying, this is good, and repeating to me. And in the end, some of those architects end up being my favorites. I'm a big Bertrand Goldberg fan. Let's do positive stuff. So there's a negative world, we're doing all these bad things. What can we do? Option one, in my version of critical sustainability, celebrate negative behavior. Don't run from it. This is a friend of mine, Jorge Otero Pius. He teaches at Columbia University. This is a project he just did at the Biennale in Venice called The Ethics of Dust, in which he's taking latex casts of buildings in Italy and cataloging all the pollution that's been gathered on them. He's not claiming to fix them. He's not coming up with any great scheme. He's also a professor in historic preservation too, which is pretty interesting. So he's just cataloging these things, and he's turned it into a series of performance art. Seek incongruous hybrids. Combine ideas that should never have met. Evolution happens naturally. Force it, and force it in ways that are painful. This is when things get very interesting. This actually ties into some of the early discussions about landmines and things like that. This is an artist who's making a statement. A gene company called Rifle Genes. It's an art project. It's not a real industrial design project, but a commentary on both the gene production and the awareness of the post-industrial world and landmines. Another project. This is a fellow I know at Stanford University, Sebastian Thrun. He's approaching, of course, we always have problems with cars. This is a great problem. We've already had that discussed before with car shares and things like that. How do you readdress that problem in a bigger, more innovative way than saying, let's redefine the car, let's make it hybrid, let's start using alternative energies? Sebastian's doing some very interesting things. He stopped studying the car and started studying the road. If you're going to fix the car, you have to look at the road. And he started doing really weird statistic analysis. One of his figures is that the average road, when it's very full and trafficked, only 8% of the road is covered by cars. And if you think about your rules when you were learning how to drive, depending on how well you behave them, if you're driving very fast, you're supposed to have 5 car lengths. So if you do the math, even on, I wouldn't say on the way out here, the Gardner served that purpose, or the QEW, but in general, roads are basically empty. There's lots of room, even when they're crowded. So that's a waste of resources with all these roads. So that's a problem. And one of the other problems is we have lots of car accidents. So why do we have car accidents? Are they bad cars? No, drivers make mistakes. So drivers are making mistakes. There's lots of room on the road. So if we can make our cars drive with a centimeter between them, we'd fill up the roads. And if we can eliminate the driver, all of a sudden we can line up the freeways and just zip along. And then if the cars themselves, one of the reasons why a car like this weighs 2,500 pounds is because it has reinforced steel, reinforced window, all this stuff for safety because we wreck our cars. If we're driving in tandem and we're not driving our cars, they can be made out of lightweight materials. So it's a proposition. So he's coming up with these and basically too, he's also able to incorporate artificial intelligence into how the car sees the road and can adapt. But I like the way he's approaching it because he's not starting with the car, he's starting with the road and working backwards. Observe and avoid practice. That's one of the interesting things too. If you want to be a better practicing designer, there's a great quote by Victor Papanek I give my students. It goes on and on and on. If we really want to help the world, everyone just quit working. And don't become designers, do something more useful. And then he stops at the end and says, that's not really realistic. But when we're avoiding practice and we're observing, that period of observation is very important. And human beings have always, over time, adapted well on their own in the face of hardships. watch these adaptations. This is another project that was recently exhibited at the Biennale in Venice. These are the traditional boats of a little island in East Africa. And look how they're dealing with shipping containers, the intersection of old tech and new tech at the same time. These are the same boats that have been traveling across these channels for centuries. These great intersections of old and new. Revisit the past, and this is a Wedgwood copy of Rune columns. And also I'd say revisit the past, but don't necessarily be reverential. You can reinterpret the past without respect in a lot of ways. Explore new worlds for no particular reason. There's no reason. Some of the things we do in design are very objective-based. This is a video art installation, and I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to have a long conversation with Ed Woodman to understand the intersection of stained glass and contemporary video art. At the same time, it's a juxtaposition. I don't know the outcome of this. I don't know the actual outcome. I don't know the actual objective. This is a wonderful quote from a fellow, Alan Chachanov, who teaches at, I think I got his last name right, he teaches at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn. And he has a whole list of what he tells his industrial design students and how to be sustainable. I like number 7 the best. It's just stop making crap. Things that have no value and are useless, just don't do that. You can recognize what they are, can't you? And they all say yes, so don't do that. That's a great place to start. And if you find it online as well, it's called the 1,000 Word Manifesto, and also in a kind of the same kind of obsessive design criteria that one would do. He decided to write his manifesto and it had to be precisely 1,000 words for no apparent reason. So it's a wonderful document that has all kinds of obsessive control to it. Option 8, and this is something I believe firmly, and my little solar panel project is about that. Embrace cynicism by seeking failure. Look for accidents. Look for things that don't work. Sometimes they're actually phenomenally beautiful. I love things like this. This is IBM Random Access Memory, a counting machine, 1950s. It's a computer before it got where it was supposed to be. There are too many wires. It's confusing. They don't connect quite right. Somebody's still messing around with it. It's kind of in this nascent set of becoming. And option 9, beware all statistics and figures. I already gave you figures. You should ignore them. They've been biased by myself. Question using your intellect, experience, and most of all your humanity. These are the landing pads for the Mars rovers when they drop them, plump them down. And it's a wonderful project because they really couldn't model what reality would be on Mars when they dropped these things. They had a great chance of failure. They actually worked in many cases, but an absolutely fantastic thing where all the statistics and figures in the end were left to chance. And lastly, and this is something I think is important to talk about as well, and I've had a few conversations, not in just this room, but with my students on a regular basis. And I've repeated the story already to a couple people in the audience. I love because I teach art and design, so I love when parents say, my child's getting an art degree, please tell me what job they'll get. I doubt it. I can't do that. And that's actually a really great thing. A lot of the professions that we know and love are simply eroding. Many of you are starting your own companies anyway. Entrepreneurialism is all kinds of other aspects of things. This is a great little series by a British photographer, Steve Schofield, Trekkies' Private Lives, who studies the kind of fetishistic world in London of Star Trek connoisseurs, and how they kind of deal with it, not when they're at conventions, but on their everyday lives. There's a couple of Romulans, Klingons, I don't know my Star Trek, I'm not really versed in it, hanging out at home. So that's why I threw in the live long and prosper as well. But I think it's a very positive thing to start to see our professions as we know them erode and start to see new practices emerge. And some of these come from a very dark place, but I think a very dark place can be quite optimistic. And lastly, in closing, there's my little end, thanks. And I will say that one of the things that I do as part of my process, I had a 7-year-old test drive all my slides and read them back to me. So he did enjoy saying, so there was a little bit of profanity in there too, but it's permissible. He's allowed to say crap if I let him. So I'll close at that, and thank you.